The UDRcast is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the UDRcast, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The UDRcast encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the UDRcast. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at BILLWARDLIFE and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. Okay, so let's get started. Before we get reading, for anyone that may not know, maybe some of you know some of this, maybe some of you don't know. So Bill W., as we're going to read, was a hopeless alcoholic. He was, him and his family were devastated by Bill's illness. And Bill started connecting some dots in his recovery after he worked with the Oxford group. The Oxford group was a group of Christians who had a bit of a plan. They worked with 6 steps. And what they would do is they would go around and find drunks on the street and try to help them get sober using the Christian approach and using 6 steps. Bill W. was in and out of the town's hospital many times over the years, and he had ended up making acquaintance with Dr. William Silkworth, who wrote the doctor's opinion. And as part of Bill connecting these dots, being in the Oxford group, understanding the 6 steps, talking to the doctor and the doctor's theory that we have a allergy to alcohol. And so Bill started putting a bunch of this shit together. And then he goes into the town's hospital and he asks the doctors, you know, I think I might have something that's kind of working. Would you allow me to maybe try it in your hospital? And with some misgiving, we consented. And so the doctors were, you know, with some misgiving, they weren't really interested in Bill really doing this, but they said, okay, why not? So they watched him and they watched him. And in the doctor's opinion, it says, the cases we had followed through are most interesting. In fact, many of them are amazing. So these doctors spent their whole fucking lives trying to help addicts and alcoholics. And the doctors couldn't figure it out. They knew that some form of moral psychology was of urgent importance, but they couldn't seem to apply the powers of good, the powers of God that lie outside their synthetic knowledge. All the psychology, all the psychiatry, all the pills, all the machines, all of their fucking attempts to try to help the alcoholic failed, and it failed utterly. And this drunk walks in there with this little bit of a theory, and he's like, I want to try this. And he says, these guys are amazing. The doctor's like amazed that he spent his whole life trying to get us sober, and this guy waltzes in with this little approach and starts seeing this shit work. These doctors are blown away. And the doctor goes on to say, in the doctor's opinion, they have found nothing that has contributed more to the rehabilitation of these men and their families than this altruistic movement now growing up among them. And that is the program. That is the big book. And so this theory that the doctor had way back in the 30s, in 1955, The American Medical Association deemed alcoholism as an illness. And then in the doctor's opinion, before it was deemed an illness, they never had William D. Silkworth at the end of the doctor's opinion. They didn't put that in until it got deemed an illness. So without the doctor, we wouldn't be here today, okay? Because the doctor came up with the problem. He understood and he watched us and he connected the dots. But so the doctor is really important. But then Bill W. is the one that connected the dots. And he started working with other alcoholics. And one of the first times that he ever saw this really work was when he went to he had to go to Akron on a business trip, but he knew that he was screwed, okay? And so he's sitting in the Mayflower Hotel and he's like ready to drink. And this guy's been through the ringer enough times to know I'm going to drink. And we talk about the spiritual malady. That's the most important thing for us to understand is the spiritual malady. So he's suffering a spiritual malady, right? He's away from home. And he walks by the bar and he can hear all the partying in the bar. And he's like, I got to do something here. So there's a telephone booth in the Mayflower Hotel, and he goes into the telephone booth and he goes through these numbers that he finds, and he calls all these numbers, trying to find an alcoholic to work with because he knows that his life's on the line here. And he gets to the very last number, okay? And I think it's Henrietta Seiberling. And he calls this woman up and he's like, look, I need to work with an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic and I need to work with one. And she's like, okay, well, let me call somebody. And so she calls Dr. Bob's wife. And Dr. Bob's wife said, yeah, please bring him. Because Dr. Bob was a hopeless alcoholic who couldn't stay sober. He's about to lose his practice. And he's tried drugs. He's tried the Oxford group. He's tried everything. So Dr. Bob's wife asks Dr. Bob if he would talk to this guy. And he says, yeah, but I'm only giving Bill 15 minutes. Didn't know Bill's name at that point. So anyway, they all get connected and Bill goes over to Dr. Bob's house. And the story is that Dr. Bob's laying on the floor, sleeping. But Bill's there, he's sober. And Dr. Bob's like, you know, finally he gets him up. And Dr. Bob's like, I'm giving you 15 minutes, bud. That's it. Because everyone's talked to Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob's had everyone try to talk to him, right? He's basically thrown in the towel and he's going to die this way. But the people who cared about him. So anyway, Bill W. starts talking to Dr. Bob. But the funny thing is he ain't talking to Dr. Bob about Dr. Bob's alcohol problem. He's talking to Dr. Bob about his own alcohol problem, his own illness. He talked about what it was like, how he was baffled when he would pick up a drink with the firm resolution not to drink again. And Dr. Bob's relating. They sat there for hours and hours. And that was the beginning of Alcoholics Anonymous. That was the beginning of the big book. And Dr. Bob ended up staying sober for quite some time. But Dr. Bob didn't want to do the amends, okay? And Bill was really adamant about this process. But Dr. Bob was like, no, I'm not doing the amends. So what ended up happening is Dr. Bob had a relapse. And then when he came out of the relapse, he had to do an operation that day because he was a doctor, but he was too hungover. So Bill gave Dr. Bob a beer or two to calm his nerves so he could go do this. And Bill W. is actually living at Dr. Bob's house with his wife at this point. So Dr. Bob's wife and Bill W. are like kind of talking like, okay, what's going to happen? Let's give him the beer so he can go do this operation. So Dr. Bob leaves and he drinks the beer and he goes, does the operation. But then Dr. Bob doesn't come home. So of course, Dr. Bob's wife and Bill W. are sure that Dr. Bob's on a relapse because that's typically what happens. But Dr. Bob wasn't on a relapse. Dr. Bob was making amends. He spent all day and night going to everybody he had hurt and made amends to everybody that night. That day was the last day Dr. Bob ever drank again. Dr. Bob never had a drink again. Dr. Bob was sober for 15 years and then he died. In those 15 years, Dr. Bob worked with over 5,000 alcoholics. Okay. And Bill W., when they started Alcoholics Anonymous, the story behind Bill W. is Bill W.'s wife, Lois, wanted kids really, really bad. She had 3 miscarriages, and then she was denied an adoption. She got denied the adoption because Bill W. was such an alcoholic that the reference that she put on the adoption papers, the reference went against their family. So they got denied the adoption. So my point is with this is Bill W. was ordained prior by God to carry this message. And if you read the history in the original manuscript, which I have back here, which I've read, the amount of bullshit that Bill W. had to go through to get this book printed and to move this fellowship forward, it's inspiring. Bill W. was ordained by Creator to bring this message to help millions of people, which is still helping millions of people. Had one of those kids been born that Lois had, Bill W. would never probably be here. If that adoption had gone through, we wouldn't probably all be here. So I just want you to understand like the impact and how Creator maneuvered Bill W.'s life in such a way that he was able to bring this message to us. And without Bill W. and Dr. Bob, we wouldn't be here right now. And without Bill W.'s willingness to work with other alcoholics and Dr. Bob's. And we have it easy today. We don't have to go to we don't have to let people burn our mattresses, you know, shove beer down their throat to knock down the DTs. We don't have to do the shit that they had to do to stay sober. We got it easy today. So because we got it so easy today, why can't we just help some alcoholics? We don't have to look anywhere. We don't have to do much of anything. We don't even have to leave our couch. We can throw on Zoom and read the book with somebody. And all we got to do is share our experience, strength, and hope with somebody else. And I don't know if you've ever done it, but I've done it. To watch somebody's fuck, I can't even talk. To watch somebody like wake up and to watch the lights come on, it's fucking amazing. To watch somebody's life change in front of your eyes, like the book says, it's an experience you don't want to miss. But so many of us miss it because we're so concerned with self in our own life. So I'm just saying to you today, the book tells me to work with others. And this program saved my life. It's given me life and it's given me purpose in life. And this is what we're meant to do. If you want to get to know God, get to know your fellow man. Bill used my greatest deficit, being an alcoholic addict, Skid Row, as my greatest asset to become my real purpose, to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the fellows about us. And like Tommy is one of my best friends. And this man has changed like a fucking 100%. And he actually is doing exactly what the book talks about. And like, I can't even say enough about what this man is doing in his life today to help other people. So just the importance of what Bill W. has done for us to even be here today, because without him, many of us wouldn't be here. So before we get started, I don't know if Tommy wants to say
I would just say one thing that came to mind. We're not here so that we feel better. That's part of it, but we're here to help other people. We do this work so that we can help other people. You know, it's not, I thought this was I was just here to make my life better again. That's just a byproduct of helping other people. And I also just want to point out for those that are just addicts, Dr. Bob used basically morphine on a regular basis for the better part of 13 years so that he could work, so that he could calm his nerves from the alcoholism. He was a freaking disaster by the time Bill got to him. He was he was a doctor himself, so he had an unlimited supply of basically morphine. He was a heroin addict, you know? So if you feel like you cannot relate to the Alcoholics Anonymous book, it's the same shit. We're here, we're using drugs and alcohol as our solution to basically our spiritual problem. And I think it's really important that when you're doing this work, to not make it so selfish and about yourself. Keep in mind that one day, everything you're doing here today will be useful for somebody else, whether it's your family or your kids or the alcoholic still suffering. This work is all about other people. And I know it's hard because we get so self-consumed with our feelings and our thoughts, and you know, and we were full of fear and self-delusion and all these things. But the reality is, Creator has put every single one of us here on this path so that we can be useful to other people. So that's all I would start with.
Okay. So Bill's story. We saved this story for last at our study because the whole program is in the story. And we'll do our best to try to tie the pieces of step 1 to 12 back into Bill's story. Okay, like the whole We Agnostics chapter is all basically in Bill's story. All of step 1 is basically in Bill's story. And so the thing about Bill's story, especially if you're a drug addict, and remember the Fellowship Cocaine Anonymous uses this book as their main focal point of their recovery. So really, the substance is really not the issue here. It's the spiritual malady. So in Bill's story, because it focuses more on alcoholism as the substance of alcohol, the thing that you want to fucking attach to is the feelings and the emotions and the progression. Okay? There's a lot of ego in Bill's story because that's what actually drives our spiritual malady, is our ego, right? And then as we get further into this story, the hope starts coming. And the hope is really important. And that's what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous, Cocaine Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, whatever the fellowship is where our currency is hope. And we deliver hope. We're hope dealers. So what I want you to notice in the first couple pages here, and especially about the first half of this reading, is the ego is really, really strong in Bill. It's all about selfish, self-centeredness, Bill. And on the second page, when we get into that, you're going to see I. Everything's about Bill, okay? So let's start reading. So page 1, Bill's story. War fever ran high in the New England town to which new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned. And we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. Here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. I was part of life at last. And in the midst of excitement, I discovered liquor. So Bill W., he feels part of life at last, like he's part of everything. And he starts drinking. He finds liquor. In the midst of this excitement of life, he discovers liquor. That's really important because that was my experience. I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of the people concerning drink. In time we sailed for over there. I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. So already Bill's been feeling lonely and he turns to alcohol. And he's fairly new in his relationship with alcohol. But when he's lonely, he's turning to alcohol already as a friend, right? What happens when you're lonely? You turn to somebody, you turn to something. Alcohol is our friend. We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. Much moved. I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. So before we keep going, I visited Winchester Cathedral, much moved. That's a really important couple lines right there, sentences, for when we get later into Bill's story. So remember those two sentences. Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is near forgot whether he dieth by musket or by pot. Ominous warning which I failed to heed. 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. I fancied myself a leader. For had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation, my talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. I took a night law course and I obtained employment as an investigator. Keep an eye out for how many eyes are in this page. The drive for success was on. I'd proved to the world I was important. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? I studied economics and business as well as law. The potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or to write. Though my drinking was not yet continuous, it disturbed my wife. So Bill's not very old here, and he's hooked up with Lois, and he's already saying that, Lois is getting disturbed by Bill's drinking. And then he says, we had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that the men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophical thought were so derived. So he's already rationalizing and justifying his drinking at a very young age. And I remember doing the same thing in my teens. I was making up any excuse to justify whatever the behaviors were. By the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. So what that line means is the alloy of drink. Alloy is a metal, right? Out of the alloy of drink, Bill started forging this weapon. So the alcohol is something that Bill's starting to shape with. And he commenced to forge the weapon that one day turned in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. So this alloy of drink, it's going to work for a while. And he's forging the weapon, and it's going to really help him. It's going to expand his life. And think about your own drinking or drug use and how it actually started expanding your life and it made you feel a part of. And it maybe opened up some doors and some opportunities, maybe in like opposite sex, with your relations with opposite sex, how it gave you that confidence, that courage, maybe at business dinners and things. And just over the years, it was, a good thing to kind of get along with people with, okay? But then it turns in its flight and it cuts us to ribbons. Living modestly, my wife and I saved up $1,000. It went into certain securities, then cheap and rather unpopular. I rightly imagined that they would someday have great rise. I failed to persuade my broker friends to send me out looking over factories and managements, but my wife and I decided to go anyway. I had developed a theory that most people lost money in the stocks through ignorance of markets. I discovered many more reasons later on. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle. The sidecar stuffed with a tent, blankets, and a change of clothes, and 3 huge volumes of financial reference service. Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed. Perhaps they were right. I had some success at speculation, so we had a little money. But we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. That was the last honest manual labor on my part for many a day. We covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there and the use of a large expense account. The exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. So Bill's arriving in the world of the material. He's having a lot of success. And like in the book, it talks about, is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest his happiness and satisfaction out of this world if he only manages well? At first, maybe it's not a delusion. Maybe we can, manage some happiness and satisfaction. But you will see that at some point, this doesn't work for Bill anymore. And my story is almost identical in the way that I went out and did the same thing. And I acquired a lot of money and made a lot of things happen. And I got some value out of it. But because I was an alcoholic addict, the weapon that I forged would one day turn in its flight and cut me. It quit working for me. So for the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. My judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. Drink was taking an important, exhilarating part of my life. So look at the progression of what drink's doing. It's taken an important and exhilarating part of his life. It's still working for him. There was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. I made a host of fair weather friends. My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. So as Bill W.'s drinking is getting worse, it assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and all night. It's progressing. It's getting worse for him. It's becoming more unmanageable. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row. The word remonstrances means I'm going to find reasons why you shouldn't be my friend. So he's starting to self-isolate and call his friends out on whatever it is that he thinks that they're doing wrong. So the remonstrances of my friends, me calling you out, terminated in a row. One by one, he lost his friends and he became a lone wolf. And that's what happens. We become a lone wolf, right? We either withdraw or we piss people off or we fucking blame them and we become very isolated. This is a disease of disconnection. And the thing is, I also become disconnected from me, but I don't really know it. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelity. For loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness, kept me out of those scrapes. I love this line. There had been no real infidelity. What does that mean? Just kind of some infidelity, but nothing real, right? Maybe he didn't have sex with anybody, but he was probably on the prowl. But what I really like, for loyalty to my wife, but helped at times by extreme drunkenness. He was too drunk to be fucking around. That's what kept him out of the scrapes. The liquor was more important and he was too wasted to really go all the way anyway. So luckily, he's able to rationalize and say that there's loyalty to my wife. In 1929, I contracted golf fever. We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. So Walter Hagen was like the most prolific golfer at that time, and Bill W. is like comparing himself to Walter Hagen, right? Nothing but ego in this guy. Liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. I began to be jittery in the morning. Golf permitted drinking every day and night. It was fun to carry him around the exclusive court, which I had inspired such awe in me as a lad. I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with a new skepticism. Abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. After one of those days of inferno, I had wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock. 5 hours after the market closed. The ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape which bore the inscription XYZ minus 32. It had been 52 that morning. I was finished. So were many of my friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of high finance. So right there, there's something important. I want you to flip, if you wouldn't mind, to the We Agnostics chapter on page 46. On the last paragraph of page 46, you're going to see about halfway down, as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence. Creative intelligence is in capitals. Okay? Spirit of the universe is in capitals. Whenever you see the word God, it's in capitals. Whenever you see the word power, it's in capitals. So the importance, now back to where we're reading here, the importance of high finance in capitals. Because the book capitalizes anything that's God in here. Bill W. made high finance God. In the chapter We Agnostics, it talks about what a state of mental goose flesh this used to bring about. Who of us had not variously worshipped money, people, sentiment, things, ourselves? It's talking about what do we worship? What do we try to find God outside of ourselves with? And with a no better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or the flower? And we're talking about things from the heart. We're talking about true God consciousness inside of us, right? But Bill W. was really enthralled with status, as you can see so far. He's really enthralled with high finance. It says God, status, what people think of him. It's all really important to him so far. So let's keep going. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. My friends had dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? Tomorrow's another day. As I drank, the old fierce determination came back to win. So he's kind of devastated, goes to the bar, gets rejuvenated with some drink, and fuck it. I can do this. And he's going to do this again. I'm not going to jump. You guys are weak. I can do this. And he gets his fuel from liquor again. The fierce determination to win came back. You know, let's do this at a high level. The next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I had better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style. I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. There is his ego again. No St. Helena for me. But what happens? But drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we would stay broke. So it's progressively getting worse. We went to live with my wife's parents. Now he's moving in with his wife's parents. Things are real good for Bill W. here. Lois is probably just like, what the fuck, Bill? But she's a loyal woman, right? I found a job, then I lost it as a result of a brawl with a taxi driver. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years, or hardly draw a sober breath. So Bill W. ends up going on a spree for 5 years. This is the thing with this illness. We don't know how long the sprees are going to be. A spree might last a day, might last a week, might last a year, it might last 5 years. In Bill's case right here, a spree lasted 5 years. He hardly drew a sober breath in 5 years. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. I became an unwelcome hanger-on at brokerage places. And here we are. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. So now Bill's getting to the point where he's crossed the line in his drinking career. What used to work for him is now starting to not work. In the doctor's opinion, it talks about men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Well, you can see Bill W. was liking the effect. It was doing a lot of things for him. Then it said the sensation is so elusive that we admit it is injurious. We cannot after time differentiate the true from the false. So Bill's at that point. He still wants the elusive feeling, but it's not going to be there anymore. It's not the same anymore. And he knows that drinking's bad for him. He's starting to see this while we admit it is injurious. But Bill W. cannot after time now differentiate true from false, as you will see. He picks up the drink, looking for the elusive feeling that alcohol once gave him. But it doesn't do it anymore. The solution of drink becomes the problem. But the real problem is when you can't stop, but you can't not stop, you're fucked. We've crossed the line. And that's when no human power, no woman, no psychiatrist, no kids, no nothing can stop us. And that's why no human power could relieve his alcoholism. Okay, do you want to say anything before I keep going?
No, keep going.
Okay. Liquor ceased to be a luxury. It became a necessity. Bathtub gin, 2 bottles a day, and often 3 got to be routine. So just to clarify, bathtub gin is not gin he made in the bathtub. During Prohibition, it was a kind of like a brand name, and that's what that is. So it's not made in the bathtub. Sometimes a small deal would net a few $100s, and I would pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. I like that because I remember when I was in my active using and I was burning down my life, the first people to be paid was my drug dealers. Like, I may not have the mortgage paid and I may not have food on the table for the kids, but my lifeline of my drugs and booze, that needed to be taken care of. Plus, like Tommy and I talked earlier, there's like a idiot moral code to be good with your brothers, your drug dealers, right? But it's ridiculous, starving my kids and these kind of things to make sure but that's how powerless we get, right? We're going to do some of the stupidest things. Leave our kids sleeping in their bed, run to the liquor store or run to the drug dealer. Our kids are like 4 years old, 5 years old, 8 years old, leaving them alone to go get this stuff because we're powerless. Powerless, man. So pay my bills at the bars and delicatessens. This went on endlessly, and I began to awaken very early in the morning, shaking violently. A tumbler full of gin followed by a half a dozen bottles of beer would be required if I were to eat any breakfast. Nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. And there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So 2 things there. I like the line where he talks about eating breakfast. Like, I got to the point in my addiction where I wasn't even hungry, but I knew that I had to eat because I knew that I needed nutrients as a human being. So I would like force food into my body, but I actually wasn't ever hungry. I was more concerned with getting more chemicals in my body than I was of taking care of my body. But in order for me to like stay conscious enough to get the chemicals and substances in my body, I had to be awake. So I had to like force feed food just to like, so my body can function. Does anyone relate with that kind of stuff? Yeah, it's crazy the shit we do. Go ahead, Tommy.
Well, I think that part of that is you need food in your stomach to drink. And the other part is that, I mean, even with the drugs, I need food because I'm becoming delusional. There was that. But everything that this story talks about, I remember when I first came in, this story, it was really hard to relate. And I it was like, well, yeah, this guy's like a stockbroker, just an alcoholic. Like I didn't really think that I related to this stuff. But like, if you actually really think about the emotion and the struggle and the obsession, his obsession to be successful, like I've been through that in recovery, the obsession to be successful, where I just like go into burnout mode and at all costs do what I have to do to get success. And that's what Bill was doing. And then, but he just the drink took over. But I mean, that's a huge part of our disease, is the obsession. And that's exactly what he was doing. He convinced his wife to get on a motorbike and travel America for a year, just so that they could come back and be the man and show them all this, research that they had done through the factories and that, and just talk about getting a thought turned into an obsession, right? And he was going to go to any length to get successful. And, and I can relate to that. But, to put everything aside and just the addiction becomes the most important thing in my life. Yeah, of course that happened. I remember being in a position where it's like, I could get a 6-pack of beer or a freaking Happy Meal or whatever, McChicken meal, we'll call it. And I would choose the beer. Even though I was starving, I still needed the beer. Like, it was ridiculous, but it's like, you don't have a choice. You're trying to make a decision, but really, you know exactly what it's going to go. And, you get kids in the mix and people looking at you like, how could you possibly do this? Don't you love your kids? Well, of course you love your kids, but there's something more powerful at work there. And that's what people don't understand. And that's why we need this program so bad, and the meetings and everything, because nobody else on the planet will understand that. Nobody will understand the power that the addiction and the alcohol has for you to choose over the people that you love. And you come into AA and somebody says, I get it. I've been there. And there's something about that changes everything, and the walls come down and the mind starts to open just a little bit, enough to change. And that's what happens.
And Tommy said something that really sparked a memory in me. Like, there's a guy that I know at meetings, and he talks about how hungry he was. And this is my story too. How hungry we can be and not having any money. And then all of a sudden you get some money, and how you go from hungry to thirsty, just like that. And I remember, I'm going to get this money and I'm going to pay my mortgage, and I'm going to give my wife money for groceries. I'm going to do all these things. And then I get the money. No, I went from hungry to high real fucking quick. And I remember working up north, making about $8,000 a month. And my family didn't know that I was too addicted to this stuff. And $8,000 a month, and I'm sending home like $800 a month, because I'm blowing like $7,000 or $10,000 a month on my drug of choice. And my wife is going, what the fuck is going on? And I would like rationalize and justify and just bullshit. And, subsequently we ended up losing the house. I lost everything, but it took a few years, but destroyed relationships, destroyed everything, because I was powerless. And the thing behind the powerlessness is the fear and the pride that wouldn't let me come to a program like this, because I was so scared that people would find out. Isn't that stupid? Well, they found out all right. I could have came here and saved my house and my marriage and had some money in the bank, but no, I needed to lose it all. And to me, I needed to lose it all, because I don't know if I ever would have found God the way that I found God within me if I didn't lose it all. In the face of collapse and despair and total failure of my human resources, that's where I found the new power, peace, happiness, and sense of direction flow into me. And if I didn't get to that point, I probably wouldn't be able to say that God is the central fact of my life today, that he does for me what I could never do for myself. And I would still be sick spiritually, trying to blot out the consciousness of this illness the best I can with money and stuff, and probably still be doing some type of drugs. The next line here, me and Tommy were talking about this before the study, and he reminds me of this line big time. I still thought I could control my situation, and there were periods of sobriety which renewed my wife's hope. So the alcoholic addict can stay sober and get that grace of God sobriety, and with the firm resolution, I'm not drinking again. And I mean it. And then, so we rise the hope of our family, right? And I'm going to let Tommy talk on that because it was pretty funny, the conversation we had earlier.
Well, that line reminds me of the alcoholic torture directed at our family members. I don't know how many times because I wanted desperately to be sober, but not to the point of desperation where I even knew where to begin. So I was in and out of, like most of you know, I was in and out of detox and treatment centers. And every time I came out of the treatment center, I was gung-ho. I'm getting a job. Everything's changing. I am done with that life. And my family would just be like so full of hope. And then payday would come and I would burn it all to the ground. The lying, I would just disappear. Nobody would know where I am. And here we go again. And that's it. I'm renewing my family's hope. And I might even give them a month of sobriety sometimes. You know, they phone me on the phone. How's everything going? I've been sober. Like everything's going great. And the reality is I don't know what to do with myself. I'm good at going to work. I can't hang out with anybody that I used to hang out with because I would drink in a heartbeat because I have no mental defense. So I have to stay by myself, watch movies or whatever I have to do to just get through the weekend and then go back to work. But eventually the loneliness that he talked about creeps in. I have to hang out with someone eventually. So where do I go? I go to what's familiar. And everybody's happy to see me. Tommy, how's it going? Oh, I've been great. I've been sober. Good. We'll have a beer. Sure. And then, you know, I can't do it. I cannot do it on my own. And I have no idea what to do. That's the problem. I don't know what my problem is, and I don't know what to do. You know, treatment centers and detox centers, all that, you know, everything's a good starting point, you know, because when you don't know what to do, you got to try and figure it out. Well, I was trying to figure it out. And, you know, little by little, I started to understand. And then, you know, when I came into the program, they read the doctor's opinion. I went, holy fuck, this is it. This is what I'm going through. You know, and finally somebody actually told me, you know, when they talked about the allergy of the body and the obsession of the mind, I just went, holy shit. Like, why didn't anybody ever tell me this before? Although people did try, I just wasn't open at the time to hear it.
Okay, let's keep going. Gradually, things got worse. The house was taken over by the mortgage holder. My mother-in-law died. My wife and father-in-law became ill. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point in 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and that chance vanished. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw that I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business. And so I did. I love that. This time, my wife even will prove to you I mean business. She sees something in me. We both know that I'm done this time. This has got to be stopped. You know, the willpower, the firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over and over. Unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope of his recovery. As marshaled by Bill's own will, you will see he will fail utterly. He is powerless. He gets baffled. He doesn't know what the fuck is wrong with him. So anyway, let's take our 7-minute break and come back, and then we'll keep on rocking Bill's story. Okay, here we go. I'm going to reread this last paragraph and then keep going. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business, and so I did. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. Just like that, right? Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. So we're talking about like Bill being powerless. At a certain point in the alcoholic, he has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Self-knowledge won't fix it. Where had been his high resolve? Like all of the step one stuff is in that paragraph right there. And in the chapter more about alcoholism, it talks about Jim failing to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life. Boom, he's drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. Just like that. Bill W. has no effective mental defense against the first drink. He's utterly powerless. He has lost the power of choice in drink. You know, he can't bring into mind with sufficient force the memory, the suffering of day, week, a month ago. He is without defense. And then in Bill's story, or in the chapter more about alcoholism, it talks about Jim, you know, fucking didn't enlarge his spiritual life. Boom, he was drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. So if we don't enlarge our spiritual life through the work and self-sacrifice, the theory of God does not keep somebody sober. So this paragraph kind of has everything. And, you know, he was even pushed over a drink. And just like Tommy did when he'd go to the bar, yeah, sure, man. Fuck, I'll have a drink. I've been just at home sober. I'll have a beer. Okay. You know, how can a lack of proportion be called anything else? And that's what it's saying here. I began to wonder for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. That's the insanity, the inability to differentiate the true from the false. It's going to be different this time. So anyway, so here he is again, renewing my resolve. I tried again. Some time had passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone, and in no time I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it had happened. And so that's also in There's a Solution. And I'm just going to pull it up quickly. Sorry. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, page 24, it won't burn me this time, so here's how. And he's cocksure in this, like cocksureness. This is exactly what Bill's story is relating to in our literature. It won't burn me this time, so here's how. Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. How often have some of us begin to drink in this nonchalant way, and after the third or fourth pounded on the bar and said, to fuck's sakes, how did I ever get started? Only to have that thought supplanted by, well, I'll stop with the sixth drink, or what's the use anyhow? Because it's the first drink that sets it off. It's not the second drink. It ain't the sixth drink. When Jim and Fred in the More About Alcoholism chapter, they had one drink and they were both off on a spree. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. So renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time had passed and confidence began to replace by cocksureness. I would laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time. But I might as well get good and drunk then. And I did. See, that's the exact stuff that's in that There's a Solution. The remembrances, the remorse, the horror, the hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was the terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight, and an all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. Withering nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. So Bill's getting so bad that he's starting to have thoughts of suicide. And many of us, including myself, and I wasn't really the suicidal type of guy, but I got to a point where I remember driving down the highway at some of those last couple years where I thought about driving my little truck into a semi or just driving it off a cliff. And like, that's not me, but this is what happens. And it's not many of us, but these thoughts start rolling through our mind. And it's fucking crazy.
There was a point in my, I was at the detox center, and I had been to this detox center, I don't know how many times. And the lady that worked there, the counselor, she told me I needed long-term treatment. And, sorry, one sec. And she told me that I needed long-term treatment. And I was out in Fort McLeod, and so I hopped on the Greyhound and I was heading toward treatment, and the bus stopped in Calgary. And I remembered that I still had a prescription at the Shoppers Drug Mart for these pills that I was so addicted to. And I couldn't help myself. As soon as the bus stopped in Calgary, I had to get off. I was on my way to treatment, but something like pulled me off that bus. And I remember, so I went and I got these pills, and I took the pills and I got the relief. But then the depression that sat in because I felt like it was my last chance. So I didn't know what was wrong with me. I went down to Fish Creek Park and I decided, you know what? Fuck it. I'm so tired of trying to get sober. And I took the whole bottle of pills and I laid down and I was just going to go to sleep and never wake up. That was my plan. And then I don't know what happened. I woke up in a gas station. I must have been just gotten so high and walked to a gas station, and I hit my head on the toilet. My head was gushing. And yeah, I couldn't handle the way I was sober, but I couldn't handle the way I was when I was high either. So I was in this space where I didn't know what to do. And my thought was, you know what? I'm never going to be able to live life properly. And I had given up. You know, luckily I didn't die that night, obviously. And then there was some other stuff that went down before I got back. But then, you know, it wasn't too much longer after that I actually found real recovery. So.
And that's such a fundamental truth of us alcoholics. And that's why God is so important in this program, because he brings us the ease and comfort that we used to get out of the drink and drug that quit working. And when you first start this recovery process, it's a necessity because you're so scared of using again and feeling like Tommy kind of explained. But the thing about this God working in our lives, as you go down the road, the motivation becomes wanting God in your life because of the things that he does in your life that you could never do for yourself. Seeing how our experience can benefit others through working with others gives you that sense of fulfillment. And it reminds me of a line in Bill's story that will be next week when we read, but never was I to pray for myself, except on my usefulness bore on my helping others. And then only then might I expect to receive. And that would be in great measure. And that's like been my truth. Like helping others has been where I've received everything. And that would be in great measure. And maybe some of that other measure is some of the things that Bill really wanted, some of the money, some of the material. I think some of those things will come down the road too. And I have a theory that I absolutely live by. And maybe in 5 years, I can tell you that it came true. But when you work for God and the people work for you. And a lot of these things that you always tried to go get, they just deliver themselves to you. And but I can tell you, love has been delivered to me by my willingness to give love. And it's not even a willingness, it's just a natural human instinct to want to do that. But I never knew that because I was too blocked off with all the shit. And that's okay. Let's keep going. So the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony for 2 more years. Sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window, or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back, as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish, I feared I would burst through the window sash and all. So right here, Bill's like really ready to actually jump out a window. Like he is wanting to kill himself. I managed to drag my mattress to the lower floor lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. The next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity, so did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. And all of this stuff resonates with me. Like I did steal out of my wife's purse. I had suicidal thoughts. I was doing drugs and some other shit, and I can't even believe some of the shit that I was doing. Like maybe I will tell you. So I was crackhead, right? So I'm smoking crack, no one's home, and I grab a bottle of fucking computer keyboard cleaner, and I fucking inhaled that shit. And it fucked me right up, and I ended up fucking like falling down on the bed, doing the chicken. I swear I died that moment. My whole head went black and then white, and then all the pictures of my life all flashed before my eyes. And then I came out of it, I don't know how long, but then I used some more. Like that's fucking insanity. That combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. I thought I was going fucking crazy. I actually thought I was fucking losing my mind. But I didn't know what was wrong. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't talk to anybody. I had so much fear and pride that it almost killed me. And when it talks about selfish self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles, we must be rid of it or it kills us. That's what we're fucking talking about. There's many ways selfish self-centeredness can kill us. And that is the root of the trouble of an alcoholic addict. I was 40 pounds underweight. Well, I'm a 210-pound man. When I got to the rooms, I was 140 pounds. I used to wear a belt, and I had to make 3 new holes for that belt to hold up my pants. I was showing Tommy some old pictures while I was using about 2 weeks ago. We were looking at them because I had them on an old external drive. He's like, holy fuck, bro, that doesn't even look like you. And like, that's it, man. That's what this illness does, is it makes you a shell of a human being. But this program restores us. It gives me everything I need to be a functioning, balanced, loving human being. So my brother-in-law is a physician. And through his kindness and that of my brother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. So that's the town's hospital where Dr. Silkworth lived. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor. So this is where he meets Dr. Silkworth, who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. So I told you at the beginning of the session that Bill started connecting some dots, right? And it was the doctor that kind of explained to Bill about the illness, bodily and mentally. But it wasn't proven scientifically. It was just the doctor's theory at that time. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of desperate desire to stop was explained. And that's what Tommy was talking about earlier. finally he got what the doctor's opinion was saying, and it just was like a weight was lifted off of him. And everything made sense. It explained many things for which we could not otherwise account. And a lot of what is explained, these things that are explained, are the feelings, which is why it's important to understand the feelings in here. Not so much he's a stockbroker and he's, wanted to be a lawyer and all these other things. That's not relevant. The relevance is the feelings and the progression and everything in those respects. Understanding myself now. So he has some knowledge. I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. But it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. So he goes down fast now. It doesn't take him long to get right down to the very bottom. After time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, DTs, or I would develop wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. Because that's what they did back in those days. They didn't know what to do with alcoholics, right? They either performed lobotomies on you, put you in psych wards, killed you, put you in jail, left you on the streets. Like, there was no cure for us back then. That's why the doctor's so important in all of this shit, because he came up with the problem. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount the obstacles, was cornered at last. He became crushed by a self-imposed crisis he could no longer postpone or evade. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sorts who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. So what is that? That is Bill W. deeply conceding to his innermost self that he is fucked. The gates of hell are closing on Bill W. with a clang. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital, a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of the first drink. And on Armistice Day on 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. So now we're getting a little bit of a hint of hope. He's given you the idea that that was it. That was his rock bottom. He didn't really know it at the time. Some of the darkest pieces of our life will actually bring the biggest light of our life. And that's also in recovery. Like explaining me at like 6 years sober, I go through dark periods in recovery. But it doesn't matter how I feel, right? It's always about what are you doing? Doesn't matter how you feel as an alcoholic, because feelings are temporary. The feelings used to be blotted out with a substance. Now we turn to God. Doesn't matter how you feel, it's what are you doing? Prayer, meditation, helping others, service, all of the things that we do. And after a few years, some of the things that we do, you got to expand that shit. And you got to like try some more things. and keep trying and keep moving on, because it's always dark. There's always going to be dark. And there's a time for dark, but there's a time for light too. And then we deal with life on life's terms. No, we deal with life on God's terms, turning to God as alcoholics, addicts. And we get catapulted into this fourth dimension. We get to know happiness and peace and usefulness in a way that is incredibly more wonderful as life goes on. And that's a promise that we're given here in his step one.
And that's the stuff that keeps us going, because, you know, in our first, especially in early recovery, you do get the sense of peace and happiness after. For some people, it's the step 3 or 2, 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever it is. But you get that sense that this is what life could feel like. And then, you know, as we go, there's always more work to do, because if we had to deal with our entire life right in the beginning, there would be no chance of recovery, because, like, as I stay sober, more is revealed. And, you know, God has never given me anything that I can't handle. But I don't think it would be okay to deal with everything I've dealt with in the very beginning all in one shot. I would probably hang myself. So it's all incremental. Like, what do I have to do? And then I get periods of relief, and I see happiness and freedom. And then I can understand what sobriety feels like. So yeah, I mean, so we get these periods of what it feels like to be free and in recovery at the same time. And those are important times. Whenever a sponsee calls me and says, dude, last week was amazing and now I don't know how to get back there. It's not about getting back there. It's about moving forward. And if there's something going on that you feel disconnected now, we got to look at something else so that you can move forward, not to go back. Because I always get the call. I want to be back where I was when I was feeling good. Well, it's not about being back. It's about moving forward.
And to add to that, like, most human beings and most people in the program, we have this idea that when I'm doing God's will, everything is going to be good. And that's how a child thinks, right? It's childish faith. The thing that I think you got to realize for long-term sobriety, and the reason I say for long-term sobriety, because most people don't stay sober past a year or two, right? Because God is a theory and it's an idea that fucking, I can rely on this thing and everything's going to be good and I'm always going to feel good. That's a lie. Like, it's really a lie. To understand that God is the seemingly good in your life and the seemingly bad has to be understood. Because when the dark days come and life is kicking your ass, and it's going to kick your ass, leaning into God, leaning into the program, leaning into the disciplines is a necessity. Because if you fail to perfect and enlarge your spiritual life in the good days and the bad days through this work and self-sacrifice, the book says you will not meet the certain trials and low spots in life ahead. Most people do not meet the certain trials and low spots in life ahead, because God is the guy who fucking brings everything and it's all aces. No, when you ask God to build with me and do with me as thou wilt, then it's going to happen. However it happens. And a lot of the darkness, how dark it is before the dawn, is actually propelling you into the light again. But the thing with our brains and our turbocharger of alcoholism is when it's dark, it's always been this way and it's always going to be this way. And we can't really handle it, so we fucking take the easy route. But we can't take the easy route. But after time, after you learn these patterns of staying sober, and I'm saying like staying sober at least 5 years to see the patterns of what you do positively to manifest more sobriety, because that 1 year in, you can't really see the positive patterns because you only have 1 year in. All you're doing is looking at the negative patterns that you don't want to do anymore. But after time, the positive patterns push you along. And then you understand that the dark's going to come, but you keep moving forward anyway. Exactly like what Tommy was talking about. So I think that's really important to understand as a recovering alcoholic addict, It's not always going to be roses, but this is a promise, and this is an experience Tommy and I have experienced. Happiness and peace and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. But today it's like that right now on here because I'm in service. But this last couple days hasn't been like that. But it doesn't matter. I got to do what I got to do. And it will get better. It always gets better. It gets different. So near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through the night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dare hide the full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. So this is Abby Thatcher. So a quick story about Abby Thatcher is, Abby Thatcher is a friend of Bill's from the old days. And Roland Hazard is a friend of Bill from the old days. And so back in the days, these guys used to always hang out together, but they were all alcoholics. Roland Hazard is the guy who was in the There's a Solution story. He is the certain American businessman that went over to Europe to see Carl Jung. And he couldn't get sober on self-knowledge. And Carl Jung says, dude, you're fucking hopeless. Unless you experience an entire psychic change, there is very little hope for you. And Roland's like, okay, well, what is this psychic change? And Dr. Jung is like, well, to me, it's a phenomenon. And he said, ideas, emotions, and attitudes, Roland. Your ideas, your emotions, and your attitudes that have been the guiding force of your life have to be cast aside. And you have to allow a whole new set of conceptions to dominate you. Well, that's what we do. That's what this program does. It allows us to expose these ideas, emotions, and attitudes, cast them aside, and allow something different to fucking work in our life and change our personality. Spiritual experience. It's a personality change sufficient to overcome alcoholism. Okay? So Roland Hazard got sober. Roland Hazard went to the Oxford group back in the States when he got home, and he went and sobered up Ebby, because part of Roland's 6 steps was he had to carry the message to others. So Roland found his old buddy Ebby, and Ebby was hopeless, and he was in a hospital too, and Roland actually 12-stepped him or 6-stepped him. And then Ebby got sober. So now Ebby is calling Bill because Ebby wants to stay sober. So here we are. A cheery voice of an old school friend, Abby Thatcher, asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember his coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he escaped. Of course we would have dinner, and then I would drink openly with him, unmindful of his welfare, because Bill W. doesn't care. I thought of recapturing the spirit of the old days. There was the time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. So Bill's in depression and fucking he's not in good shape. But his old buddy who he used to drink with is going to come over. And so Bill's like, this is an oasis in my life right now. Something that lifts him up a little bit. The very thing, an oasis, drinkers are like that. Trying to recapture the old days, like it talks about in A Vision for You. The door opened, and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What happened? I pushed the drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the old fellow. He wasn't himself. Come on, what's all that about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, "I've got religion." I was aghast. Fuck. So that was it. Last summer, you're an alcoholic fucking crackhead. Now I suspect a little cracked about religion. Just condemning this guy, right? Just shutting him down. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart, let him rant. Besides, my gin would last longer than his preaching. So Bill W. is sitting there across the table from this guy, just judging the shit out of him. Like, who does this guy think he is, talking about God and now he's sober? And it's kind of like the smoker who quit smoking that's trying to pound, quit smoking to all of his buddies. And Bill's just sitting there, fuck, okay, I'm going to let this guy rant. My gin's going to last longer than this idiot. But he did no ranting. Kind of like Bill W. with Dr. Bob. It wasn't about ranting. It wasn't about telling you anything. In a matter-of-fact way, he told how two men had appeared in court, persuading the judge to suspend his commitment. They had told of a simple religious idea, the 6-step Oxford group, and a practical program of action. That's really important. Practical program of action. The directions in the book. Not the theory of God, but the practical application of the program as it's laid out, very clear-cut in this book. That was 2 months ago, and the result was self-evident. It worked. He had come to pass this experience along to me, because as part of Ebby's rehabilitation, he has to do this. If I cared to have it. I was shocked but interested. Certainly I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless. That's kind of like my experience. I had to be interested. I didn't want to walk in the rooms. I didn't want to talk about God. I didn't want to open this book. I didn't want to fucking do anything. But I had to. I had to be interested. If I didn't want this, I ought to want it. And that's exactly what Bill's saying. He's hopeless. I have to be interested. What option do I got? This guy who was locked up in an insane asylum is coming here. He's got a starry-eyed look. He's fresh-skinned. Who is this guy? He's thinking, like, he can't figure it out. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat still on Sundays, way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of some church folk and their doings. His insistence that the Spears really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell him how he must listen. His fearlessness as he spoke of these things just before he died. These recollections welled up from the past. They made me swallow hard. Remember that paragraph because it's important, okay? That wartime day in the old Winchester Cathedral came back again. So remember at the beginning of the story, we talked about, I wanted you to remember about the Winchester Cathedral, where he said, I landed in England, I visited Winchester Cathedral, much moved. That's all he said at the beginning of the story. He was much moved, but then he just wandered outside and went on with his day. So that wartime day in the old Winchester Cathedral came back again. So he's remembering some things. I had always believed in a power greater than myself, and I often pondered these things. I was not an atheist. Few people really are, and I agree with that 100,000%. For that means blind faith in the strange proposition that this universe originated in a cipher and aimlessly rushes nowhere. Straight out of way agnostics. My intellectual heroes, the chemists, the astronomers, even the evolutionists, suggested the vast laws and forces at work. Straight out of way agnostics. Despite contrary indications, I had little doubt that a mighty purpose and rhythm underlay all, underlying the totality of things, the creator of the universe. Straight out of we agnostics. How could there be How could there be so much of the precise and imputable law and no intelligence? I simply had to believe in a spirit of the universe who knew neither time nor limitation, but that was as far as I had gone. So he had at least a willingness, right? He had a little bit of a willingness. That's as far as he had gone. With ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. Straight out of we agnostics again. Laboriously set out to prove ourselves it's not true, that God doesn't exist. Because pride, stubbornness, obstinacy, we often found ourselves handicapped by these things, all in we agnostics. When they talked of God with the ministers and the world's religions, I parted right there. Because Bill W. had a religion pushed upon him. And he had abandoned the God ideal entirely, like it talks about. When they talked of God personal to me, who was love, superhuman strength, and direction, I became irritated and my mind snapped shut against such a theory. That's all in we agnostics. Like this whole Bill story is all through the book. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. And that's kind of important, right? For myself, I adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. And I remember in my young youth, I went to Catholic school my whole life, right till grade 12. And I remember thinking, like, I don't believe all this shit, but I believed in enough to take certain pieces of the stuff with me for the rest of my life. And I really didn't believe in God and I didn't like God, but I must have known something was in me that believed in it. Because when I had my kids, I talked my wife, ex-wife now, I talked her into sending our kids to Catholic school. And what I said was, just send them to Catholic school for like 2 or 3 years so that they can get the impression that there is something. And then if they don't want to go anymore, that's totally cool. So that's what we did. We sent them to Catholic school. And then after a few years, they didn't want to go there anymore. So like I kept up my part of the bargain and they just went to wherever my wife let them go. But today they have that thing in them that believes, well, there might be something, right? And that's all I wanted them to believe. But even back then, I didn't have much of belief in like real God like I do today, I guess.
And I guess the only thing I would say as we read through this is why it's so important that religious talk is not done in the rooms, because if you have someone with a prejudice or something that had harmed them because of their religion and they come in for their first or second meeting and they start hearing about religion, they're never going to come back. And that's why I think it's really important that the meetings are open to any sort of higher power to, so that they don't get the wrong idea of what this program's all about. And that's just why it's really important, because I actually had a sponsee that was abused by somebody from the church, or man of the cloth. And he really struggled to get into these rooms because he couldn't separate the two. The whole God talk and everything really discouraged him, but we did get past it, and I don't know what he's up to today, but yeah, and Bill knew that. And Bill knew that, you can tell, right? That's why in that way agnostics, he really drives home the fact that the spirit of the universe, creators, creative intelligence, all these different labels. And he really knew that part really well. And I think that's a huge part of why this program works so well for so many different people. But I think we are going to wrap it up there.
Okay, so we're in Bill's story. Just kind of recapping what we've already been through. We've been through Bill, his illness getting severely progressive. The line that's sticking out in my mind is Alcohol was his master. He was drinking out of necessity, and he got to the point where he can't stop. It was funny because one of his old school buddies, Ebby Thatcher, popped over, and Bill figured he could, get some old chuckles out of this relationship and maybe get Ebby to have a drink. And Ebby's like, no, got religion, Bill. Sorry, bud. And Bill was kind of appalled and figured, this guy's cracked up. He's gone all religious, and Bill's liquor is going to last longer than Ebby's ranting. And then it was funny. He said Ebby did no ranting. He just explained to Bill what had happened to him. And Bill had an experience, a number of small experiences while Ebby was there visiting. The door of God started getting cracked open. I'm just going to touch base on page 10 a little bit. He talked for hours. Childhood memories rose before me. I could almost hear the sound of the preacher's voice as I sat still on Sundays way over there on the hillside. There was that proffered temperance pledge that I never signed. My grandfather's good-natured contempt of the church folk and how their doings and of their doings. His insistence that the spheres really had their music, but his denial of the preacher's right to tell them how they must listen. That wartime day in old Winchester Cathedral came back again. He's starting to start seeing things, that there might be a God. And this is like the premise of the We Agnostics chapter, right? A willingness, upon a willingness even to believe, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. And that's kind of what's happening. I had always believed in a power greater than myself. I had often pondered these things. And it's just starting to crack open for me. And that's the most important thing for new people, is just a willingness, because as you go through the work, the book will produce the results that it needs to, right? And that's what's happening to Bill. So that's where we're at pretty much. We're on page 11. We're about 2 paragraphs down, but I'm just going to start at the top of page 11. So to Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching was most excellent. For myself, I had not adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. Oh, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I disregarded. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and the tyranny that religious dispute had facilitated made me sick. I honestly doubted whether on balance the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe, and since the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed to be boss universal, and he certainly had me. So Bill's having a really tough time here with the God thing. He's seen all of this negative things, and he's kind of thinking, well, how could God have anything to do with any of this stuff? The brotherhood of man, a grim jest. And if there was a devil, he's certain to be the boss universal. And that's kind of, in many ways, kind of what we see when we just look at the world. We look at these wars and all of these things happening, and it's like, how could God really be a part of this, right? But as Bill sits here and listens, but my friend sat before me. He made the point blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. The doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had in effect been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap level of life, better than the best he had ever known. And I really like this paragraph because, the doctors have pronounced this guy incurable. Like myself, I had admitted complete defeat. Once you get to this point of of hopelessness as an alcoholic addict, you're pretty much ostracized. You know, I go to Alpha House all the time, and these people are on the margins of society. And we see the street people downtown, and they're on the total margins of society. You know, and that's kind of what he's talking about here. A lot of us don't ever make it that low, you know, to the low bottom level. But it doesn't matter. If we have the illness, we have the illness. But the point is it doesn't matter how far down the scale you go. This shit can work. And I've seen people from Alpha House that I thought were just going to die a painful, slow death. And I've seen some of those people recover. And I've also seen a few of them recover and then relapse and then die. So, you know, I guess it's how bad are you going to work your program once you got this? Because it's a daily reprieve, right? It's the only disease that tells you don't have a disease, which is why I think it's really important way back in There's a Solution, where Bill writes an illness of this sort, and we have come to believe it is an illness. You know, you have to come to believe you have an illness. Sticking around here for a little while, you start seeing people die. And you start seeing people go back out. And you start seeing when they rest on their laurels, when they're resting on their complacency. And the word complacency came up at one of our meetings recently, and it really stuck in my mind. What is complacency? Everyone thinks it means kind of like being lazy. What it means is it's self-satisfied. You get satisfied with the way things are. And when you get satisfied, self-satisfied, you're resting on your laurels, and alcohol and drugs are a subtle foe. And it's not even the alcohol and the drugs. Remember, we need a psychic change. So the old psychic thinking comes back. And if we live too much in that old ideas and behaviors and the emotions, you know, the little switch goes off and we need to drink again. So, you know, continual work in this program is very important. So I'm just going to read that last bit of this paragraph again. Then in effect had been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap of life to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. So Bill used to run around and paper millions. Bill made a lot of really good money in his life. Bill had some really good times in his life, but he talks about here a level of life better than the best he had ever known. And like in some ways I can relate to this exactly. And, you know, I had a $1 million house and company that did $3 million a year, and I had boats and I had all that shit too. But when I really sit down and think about things and I feel the feelings that I have, in so many respects, not even a lie, you know, I lived the best life that I've ever lived in many respects. You know, my ego wants me to kind of remember and morbidly reflect on the material blessings and the money and, you know, but the feeling that I have inside, like it's unreplaceable. So I love this line. Taken from the scrap heap of life to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Fuck, I love that, man. And that kind of just ties in with we will be reborn, recreating our lives. It's a new life. It's a different life, and it's new. Guns, you got anything to say on that? New life?
Yeah. Well, yeah, because there was a time where it was like sex, drugs, and rock and roll for me, and like I was living a high, fast-paced life. It was super exciting, and you know, I thought that was it. I thought that was the way to live, and the guys that I was hanging out with back then are still doing the same shit. And you know, I'm kind of lucky in that sense where I went further down and just abandoned everything because of my addiction, and you know, just basically went off on my own. And so coming into recovery, I was in a point of such desperation that you know, I just grabbed onto this thing not knowing what it was. And but I was quickly shown that God was working in my life. And But you know what Bill was just talking about? I think it was about 5 years after, and I've been kind of in and out of the program. I decided I'm going to go hang out with my old buddies, and I did. And the first time I made it through the night, but I wasn't working a program at this point. I was sober, but I wasn't working a program. And I go out with these guys, and like, again, they're just like party animals and like endless amounts of money and all the things that the ego wants, right? And then so I went out and I made it home that night. But the second time I went out, it just looked like too much fun because I felt so bad. I was not spiritually connected. My mind told me like, this is gonna be fun tonight, and it wasn't fun. I woke up in the morning so sick and throwing up. I don't even remember the night. So I can't even tell you if it was fun or not. And, the guys were texting me all the crazy things I was doing, and it was like, fuck this again, right? And I quickly got back to the program, luckily, but it's very important to really understand that there's no getting normal in this program. It's not about getting normal. It's about the spiritual maintenance on a daily basis. And then we'll act as if we're normal, but I'm never going to be normal. I have to accept the fact that I have a disease. It's very important to accept that, because no matter how hard I try, I don't ever get rid of that aspect of myself. The fact that if I drink one drink, then there's no stopping. If I take one drug, then there's no stopping. It's the alcoholism. I cannot get rid of it. It's something that I have forever. And I know guys that stayed sober for 25 years and the doctor told them to have red wine for their heart. So they did, and they ended up in treatment with me. There's a guy in there, 25 years sober. And, he decided to have red wine because he had a bad heart, and the doctor told him to, and he thought, what's the big deal? I haven't had a drink in 25 years, and he almost killed himself. So, I mean, it's just not something that, we're meant to do. And I'm cool with that. It's kind of like, it's just like my allergies to animals. Like, it doesn't go anywhere. And, so I don't go ride horses and stuff because I'm like deathly allergic to horses, and that's probably never going to go away. And I'm cool with that. Thing is with alcoholism is like, I can beat myself up and still want to go back. When I found out I was allergic to horses, my throat closed, my eyes closed, and I've never ridden a horse again. I never thought it was a good idea to go ride a horse again, because I know that I could almost die if I ride a horse. Thing is with alcoholism, doesn't matter how the beating that I put on myself, if I don't stay on top of it, eventually I'm going to convince myself that it's a good idea to drink again. And it's insanity. If I went and rode a horse every year and almost died every time, people would be like, you're fucking nuts. And that's just like that, it's just like alcoholism. So it's no wonder my whole family's like, stop drinking. You like, just stop. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? It's not that bad. It's insanity.
Okay, let's keep going. Second last paragraph on page 11. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past. Here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. So I just want to stop there and talk about a meeting that we had on our channel last night. We had a birthday meeting, and we had about 10 people came to celebrate their birthday. And like, it was pure miracle, and it was just like open heart. And I'm sure most of these people, if they were anything like me, lived with a closed heart most of their life. But it was like an amazing thing. Watching these people celebrate 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, 9 years, 16 years. Ron celebrated 31 years. Like this shit fucking changes people. And it opens your heart. And Bill's heart's opening right here, right? Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. His heart is opening. He's starting to see something. Abby's just talking about the language of the heart. Abby's talking about God and his own experience, and Bill's heart is just opening. I saw that my friend was much more inwardly reorganized. Psychic change. He was on a different footing. Talks about the footing in our book, the footing of God, the cornerstone. His roots had grasped new soil. And let's talk about that quickly. Selfish self-centeredness is the root of our trouble, and that's the foundation of self. Well, our roots get to grasp new soil, new foundation, right? Foundation built in God. And through that experience is why all this shit works. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed that there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I revisited the thought of Tsar of the heavens. However loving his sway might be, I have since talked with scores of men who felt the same way, and I'm one of them. So he's still pushing this idea away, you know? He's bristling with antagonism as soon as the word God kind of has that different idea in his head. But earlier, he started thinking about it, right? So my friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? So I read that really calmly. I'm gonna replay that like how I think it went down. Here's Abby talking about the program, talking about God. Here's Bill looking at Abby. Can't deny what he's fucking seeing, but Bill's obstinacy is so great, and Bill's a smart ass. He's probably combating Abby, and Abby's just doing Abby's thing. And then the temperature is probably rising. And Abby's like, why don't you choose your own fucking idea then, Bill? And I think that's how this came to be. Because I know that the Oxford group where Abby was coming from, they talked about the Christian God, right? But I think that this is probably how this came to be, where we choose our own conception. Abby just got so pissed off at Bill and said, you know what? You want to fight me? Choose your own fucking God, you stubborn prick. And then there we go. That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. That little saying just broke the walls down. And it talks about it at the end of that We Agnostics. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. There's Bill's old fierce determination, but now it's changed into like a really positive way. You know, remember back in the story, you know, the fierce determination to win came back when he had lost all his money on the stock market. So he still has that in him, and now it's switched. And that's kind of the same with me. I built my business and I was like fucking willing to do anything to make my business successful. And then I came here and I just used all the same willingness that I had for material success for spiritual success. And so it's worked in a really positive way. Before I used to seek the material success and kind of roll over people. Now I look for a spiritual success, I guess, not even, but it's helpful to people. So it's used in a really positive way now. So would I have it? Of course I would. Thus, was I convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. There we go. Thus, I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want him enough. That's really important, right? Going towards God in your recovery, moving towards him always, he discloses himself to us. And when we disconnect from him, he disconnects from us. I don't think he actually disconnects from us, but we start blotting him out and things just go back to the same. But seeking him more and more and more, no matter what's happening in your life. And like, I don't know if we talked about it last week, but I like to talk about the childish faith of God. Like, a child always believes that God is everything, like good. God's going to bring me all of these things. God's going to make everything happy and good in my life. And that first year of recovery is usually aces. And a lot of people have great experiences with God in that first year. But in the second and third year, it's not so rosy. It's not so fucking bubbly. And I'm of the belief that God is seemingly the good and the bad. When I make the decision in step 3 to build with me and do with me as thou wilt, that decision actually has a lot of fucking pain in it. How dark it is before the dawn. And going through the psychic change and the personality change as you encounter the situations that really test what you got, that's when we turn to God. And you keep turning to God because God will get us through that. And as we get through these circumstances or fight through these things with his help, we start healing. We start healing. And I love it in We Agnostics. What is this but a miracle of healing? Circumstances made him willing to believe. Everything we're reading right here is in the last page and a half of We Agnostics. And I fucking love reading that with sponsees when I do step 2. Like, I don't even think it's me sitting there. Anyway, so the next paragraph, bottom of the page. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. So remember Bill W. talking about when we started the story in old Winchester Cathedral? And he had those ideas? The real reason burst upon him right now. As he's having his awakenings, as he's having his spiritual experience, the real reason actually speaks to him. I'm not going to go back there, but for a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. But soon the sense of his presence been blotted out by worldly clamors, most of those within myself. And so it had ever been since, how blind I had been. So I love that last piece in that paragraph. You know, there had been a humble willingness to have him with me, and he came. And I've worked with so many people, and I've had the same experience that there's like a point where your heart just believes in this thing for a minute. And if somebody's talking to me when I was new about this God thing, and I'm pretty judgmental, but then for a minute or a second, there's that feeling of like, fuck, I need and I want that. But then it's quickly blotted out by worldly clamors, most of those within myself. And I see that happen with sponsees all the time. And when we do this chapter, We Agnostics, I'm going to say like pretty much 100% of the time when I do this chapter, fucking hearts get slammed open. Hearts are open. This chapter, We Agnostics chapter, changes people's fucking lives. And I've seen many a person cry in the We Agnostics chapter because it just does something to us. We need and want that power. And if that chapter is delivered properly, that can change the alcoholic's life, in my opinion. But if it's just read, there's a lot of shit that gets like just read. But I think through one's own recovery, seeking the spiritual solution based in the literature, working with other alcoholics, that chapter grows to a place where anybody can bring the value out of that chapter. And it's not just a chapter. It's like pure God all over that We Agnostics chapter. But I still get this too. I still get this feeling right here. Like I can fucking be great for all day. And then all of a sudden I just get like a wave that comes over me, and it's just like fucking morbid reflection and fucking dark. And I needed and wanted God, and he was with me. And then boom, I can be totally off the beam and fucking in like a second. And that's the worldly clamors, most of those within myself. They blot out God. But the thing with me, at least at 6 years in almost of recovery, I've been through this process enough times to know that it's going to pass, and it's not a matter of how I feel, because if I just go on how I feel, it's just going to fucking get worse. I got to make the decision in these moments. What am I going to do about this? Because that moment sets me up for the next moment. What am I going to do? Am I going to talk to somebody? Am I going to do some reading? Am I going to do some prayer? Am I going to go into the darkness and feel what the darkness is about so I can explore it? Because if I don't at some point in recovery explore the darkness, that shit is always there. And if I just push it aside, it's actually just manifesting it worse. So there's a number of tools that you learn, but you got to stay sober, right? And you got to be digging in. Because if you're just sober and not like digging in and fucking expanding your spiritual life, that shit that you never deal with, it will deal with you in an emotional way. And it's like, it's more of a spiritual crisis that becomes a fucking mental crisis. And if it's a mental crisis, it will become an emotional crisis. I think most mental illnesses, mental crisis illnesses, are a spiritual fucking crisis first. But we become so in tune with medicating the mental health of us, because that's what we hear. It's all about mental health, right? The fucking mental health is rooted in the spiritual health. So, and if the mental health and spiritual health aren't taken care of, the emotional shit that you can't fucking handle creates more mental, and the spiritual doesn't get looked at. And then it causes physical, causes illnesses and all sorts of shit. Right back to the step 4. When the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically, because it's the most important part of us. But yeah, I don't know. Guns?
Yeah, I would say the foundation of willingness is probably the most important thing, because as soon as we lose the willingness, that's we lose the willingness to pray. We use the willingness to reach out. We lose the willingness to go through the book or to sponsor or whatever it is. So our foundation must be set in willingness, because, when I look at my past experiences with relapse, that was the first thing to go, and, if I get into prayer and, I haven't prayed in a week, and then I'm convincing myself that, the prayer doesn't work anymore or something crazy, because I have alcoholism. I'll tell myself all kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, how do you do that? Well, in my opinion, you stay really close to the program, and you stick around people that are living a spiritual life, because it keeps you willing. It keeps you willing to want to do this stuff. And be careful what you're putting into your subconscious mind, because if you're watching Netflix for 5 hours straight of a bunch of garbage, it's not going to add anything to your spiritual way of being. Like, really surround yourself with spiritual people, spiritual material. Like, your life depends on this, and you'll see. I mean, I've been through the times of, I just watched like gangster movies every night for like a month, and I just felt awful every day. And then, I switched it over to like a bunch of spiritual material and was sponsoring and all this stuff. And like, without a doubt, like, you just have to go through the experience, and you'll know right away what affects you and what doesn't. And now, some of these movies that I used to like, I try and watch them now and I just can't watch them anymore. It's not like, it just doesn't feel right. And it's not like, it's not like it's that big of a deal, but I really believe that all of this God-given mental, spiritual, emotional is like a fucking temple for me today. And I try and keep it that way just because I like to feel better. And I've done enough of the roller coaster ride of sobriety where I'm just like kind of fucking done with that shit because, life is hard enough. I don't need to add a bunch of other stuff in the mix. And this kind of thing keeps me willing and keeps me growing and keeps me open-minded. And, but I definitely understand how we can easily get into the, whatever society says. It's been telling me the same thing my entire life. So of course this stuff's going to get in the way once in a while. Why do you think people like us have to constantly rely on a higher power? Because that stuff gets us drunk, but it's going to happen. It still happens to me, like Bill said, of course. But being aware of when it's happening starts to get you closer to God. All those old behaviors, old thought patterns, all that stuff drives me to God even harder because there's a lot of stuff going on in me that I don't understand. And it just happens to me. And that's why I need people in the program so I can talk about it. I can't just sit there and pretend it's not there anymore. It doesn't work. It does not work. And I did that most of my life, just pretend that it's not happening. Sometimes I don't know what's happening, but that's why I have people in the program, sponsor, sponsees, everything, so that I can start to understand that stuff. And I need to be able to be patient with myself and understand that this stuff's going to happen. I'm not trying to be perfect here. I'm still a human being, I'm just accepting what comes up now. I may not like it. I want to feel good all the time. That's just that's just the way I think, but it's not the case. But going through the hard times always brings more better times. And the gap gets smaller and smaller in between, right? So I don't know. It's, I could see how this easily happens. Even like when I first came into the program, it was like, yeah, I was all for this because I came in desperate. And then what happens? Well, I start judging people. I start wanting more. I start predicting outcomes. And then I just feel like a bag of shit. And that's what happens. It's my thinking that gets in the way of my connection with my higher power.
Okay, I'm going to keep going here. This is a really important page. This page has so much information on it. And I'm probably going to ask some questions as we go through this page. But what I also want to highlight here is, from this point on till the end of the chapter, how many times Bill W. talks about working with others. Okay, because now we're getting into the program. Okay, so here we go. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There I humbly offered myself to God, as then I understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. Ruthlessly, I faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me and I fully acquainted him with my problems and deficiencies. We made a list of people I had hurt or toward whom I felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, but that would be in great measure. So I'm going back to the top of the page, second paragraph. There I humbly offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with me as he would. I placed myself unreservedly under his care and direction. I admitted for the first time of myself I was nothing, that without him I was lost. So what step is that? Can someone unmute and tell me what step we're talking about?
3.
10-4. We're talking about Bill W. here finally asking for help in step 3. We already went through Bill W. in step 1. Most of Bill's story was all in step 1. And in our big book, our first 103 pages of the solution, 56 pages of that is pretty much step 1. So that's the kind of the same reflection that we just had in Bill's story. Most of it is step 1. But then we just talked about Bill saying on page 12, it was only a matter of being willing to believe in the power greater than myself. Nothing more was required to make my beginning. So he's already got his step 2 over here. And now he's here at step 3. And Matt just nailed it. That's step 3. He's now fucking surrendering, or trying to, making attempt to. Because when you first make that decision, by no means, in my opinion, is there a surrender, really. There's a willingness to surrender, but the rest of the work has to happen because you don't actually know the causes and conditions and why you make a heavy going of life and what causes the failure of life. So anyway, and then we get into, I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. So what steps are we talking about there? Anyone?
Sounds like 4, 5, 6, 7.
You're close. It's mostly 6 and 7 here. Okay, he jumps around a little bit, but now he's facing the sins. So in 4 and 5 we start seeing them, but in 6 we face them, right? And we become willing. There's the key word, willing, to have God, the newfound friend, take them away, root and branch. And there's components of 4 for sure, but in this next paragraph, Marvin, my schoolmate visited me. I finally acquainted him with my problems. There they are, step 4. And deficiencies, 5. We made a list of people I had hurt, towards I felt resentment. There it is. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals. Okay, I'm backing up. So right there is the 4 and the 5. Okay, so he does jump around in how he lays it out in Bill's story, but that's just the way it's written. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to write all such matters to the utmost of my ability. Steps 8 and 9. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within me. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, only asking for direction and strength to meet my problems as he would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive, and that would be in great measure. So that paragraph is step 10 and 11. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. And when we look at step 10, I'm just going to quickly flip there. It talks about on page 85 at the bottom of the page. Much has already been said about receiving strength and inspiration and direction from him, who has all knowledge and power. If we have carefully followed the directions, we have begun to sense the flow of his spirit into us. To some extent, we have become God conscious. We have begun to develop this vital sixth sense, but we must go further, and that means more action. So he's talking about that right here, testing the thinking by the new God consciousness. I'm thinking about me, fuck, turn to God. And then it goes into step 11 stuff too right there. And one of my favorite full lines of this whole fucking big book is right here. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my request bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive. That's fucking awesome. I get to expect something in this literature. I expect to receive. There's a fucking guarantee. That's what I like about some of this shit. I want some guarantees. What am I going to receive? That would be in great measure. So he doesn't really say what you receive. But I think great measure sounds like a pretty good fucking promise to me. And I just want to point out something else that I just remembered at the first paragraph up here at the top. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, and without him I was lost. Think about the times in your day or in your weeks or in your life where you're lost. You're probably not turning to God. And in those moments of the day where you just don't know what to do, we're lost. But we don't need to be lost. We don't need to be lost. We just keep doing this shit and we don't get lost. And the more that we do this shit, and I'm talking about following that step 10 direction and actually turning our will and our lives over. Because just the idea that I can turn my will and my life over, to me, maybe sometimes I am able to. But the following the step 10 direction, if we had followed directions carefully, that allows me to turn it over. Like if I'm aware of the fucking directions, that's what I do over and over and over and over. And through the consistent, persistent commitment to turn it over, eventually it starts working. And it takes time. Some of us have this hard wiring deeper than others. Some of us are more willing than others. But it's a matter of consistency. And then things start to shift. They start to change. And then as you experience the changes that God brings in through the consistency, then it just becomes easier and easier. And we talk about belief turning into some faith, turning into trust. So when a lot of people start this, it's a belief. Well, it works for you. It works for him. Fuck, I'm going to have the belief because I don't know if I believe it for me, but I believe it for you guys. Look at the fucking evidence. And then you start doing it. And then the faith starts coming. And you start fucking telling other new people, I don't know how this is working, but it's fucking working. Something's working. And then you keep doing it. You keep doing it. And the more confidence you get with the results that you've seen, now you're going to take a step off the cliff from bridge to shore and not really know. And then you do that and then fucking it works and something works. And then the next time you take another fucking leap of faith because it worked last time. Let's try it again. And it's like jumping off the fucking cliff with no parachute. But the parachute keeps opening. And then you just start going, you know what? I trust my God. And it's not a matter of guessing. You just jump off the cliff every time. And then you just start putting it in God's hands. Everything. But it comes through practice, right? Practice, man. And commitment to fucking turn to him and ask him. Then only then might I expect to receive, and that would be in great measure. I fucking love that, man. That's what I want. So I try to remember this line. I don't pray for myself. Bill, do not pray for yourself, except on how your usefulness will help other people. Because I want this promise. I selfishly want this. I want this, man. I want to receive in great measure. And to a large degree, I have received in great measure. And I continually receive in great measure. I don't know if anyone was on the birthday meeting last night, but I showed up on the meeting and I didn't expect to give away introduce anybody except maybe Ted. I ended up fucking introducing like 7 people or fucking 6 people last night. And that's what I get paid in. I get paid in fulfillment and gratitude that I'm able to even fucking be a part of somebody's fucking life like that. fuck, man. Like I'm humbled by that. In the moment, while I get asked to fucking give birthday cards away on the meeting, there's a little bit of like weird feeling. But when I get down to the fucking truth, I'm fucking honored, man. I'm honored to, because I helped a little piece of helping save somebody's life. And that feeling, you can't fucking pay people money for that shit. You could never pay me the money that I get for that feeling. And fuck, that's what makes me want to do it more. Not the accolades, the fucking look in somebody's eyes when they wake up in their own life. It's fucking amazing shit. Guns, you got anything?
No, I think we can take a break and then we'll come back.
Okay, we're going to get back to it. Bottom of page 13. So here's Bill, just went through a bunch of his processes, and now Ebby's going to be making some promises for him. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all of my problems. I love that. It answers all of our problems. And like, you know, I've heard in the rooms, you know, this program doesn't solve all of my problems. Well, I guess that's a matter of perspective. Yeah, I'm sure the meetings don't solve all your problems. But it's been my experience with the Creator in my life. All of my problems have been solved. Is outside help a good idea? Yeah, it is a good idea. In addition to, you know, and whatever outside help you're going to get, whether it's for psychology or whatever you're dealing with, you know, I guess it's components of the step work anyway, right? But not in place of. And my experience is that Creator has solved all of my problems. Most of my problems, like the book says, are of my own making anyway. Worldly clamors within myself. You know, my own selfishness, my own expectations of how I think things should be, and my desires that drive me, that cause me my problems.
I think sorry.
Go ahead.
I think it's important too, because he says it's a way of living. It's not a way of doing this part-time. If it's a way of living, it's everything we do. It's our work, it's our family, it's our program, it's everything we do. We pray and meditate our way in, through, and out of everything. Because we have to live this program. Like, I don't know how many times I struggled. Like, I'm coming up on 3 years, and it took me like 12 years to get 3 years, because I refused to bring this program into my life. I always thought it was to get me sober, but I still had to find success, and I still had to, you know, create everything in my life. And I made a really heavy going of life that way, because I refused to make this a way of living. It was only something that I did part-time, really. And it definitely did not work out well for me. But it has, ever since I've made this commitment, like a solid step 3 decision to actually do this program. Everything is different. And yes, all my problems have been solved, literally. And it's like this balance of effort and effortlessness, because the effort comes from my actions and the effortlessness is in my thinking. And it's a really hard thing to come to terms with sometimes, but if I can slow down the way I react to life, I'm going to have less problems. If I release the outcome to God, I'm going to have less problems. Even though the problems seem like they're so heavy sometimes, I always make it through it. I haven't died through any problems yet. You know, alcoholism wants me dead. It wants me dead. But, you know, God wants me to live, and God wants me to bring this program into my life, or else I wouldn't be here.
Okay. Belief in the power of God plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was an utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of the mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. Caitlin F., are you there? Katie?
Yeah, what's up?
I was wondering if you would share your experience with this, as I know you, and I know that you're not like through the program, but just this piece here. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. So, and I know, like I know you, right? And I know the stubbornness that you had and some of the things that I said about this program and how you like were like, fuck, I don't know. And then at some point over this last period of time, somewhere along the way, there was a level of surrender there. And I was just wondering if, you know, you could share on the, you know, your thoughts of what you thought and then your surrender and kind of how the load lightened or whatever your experience is. And if you don't want to, that's totally cool too.
No, I'm happy to share. Yeah, you kind of nailed it. I'm Caitlin, I'm alcoholic. And I couldn't understand a program that wanted me to give up my control and my will. You know, I like the disease is so cunning, baffling, and powerful. Like it has me convinced that I am doing a really great job at my life when I'm doing the exact opposite of that. I am literally finding every single possible way to burn my life down to the ground. And when I first came into the program, I was so stubborn and so obstinate towards God and just only had my ears open in meetings to prove all of the ways that I was right and that God either didn't exist, or if he did, he was just like fucking everybody and everything through religion, or that religion was just like God was a construct of religion to control people. And this is a very deeply rooted feeling that I have. And it took a lot of beating and a lot of lows and a lot of going back out to finally just like give it a try. Like I was just so low. I mean, Bill, I'm sure you remember what I was like when I showed up at your house that day to get my bag that I had left in his car when I was drunk that had all of my like medications in it. So it's like not just like having the worst day of my life. I also was like withdrawing from my medications. It was awful. And I just wanted to go home and kill myself. And I was like, that's what I was planning on doing. And I was annoyed at myself because I just picked up my cat. And I was like, well, fuck, now I got to deal with this cat and I can't just go home and do this. And Bill like made me come in and sit down and like just drilled it home. Like, you know, like, why don't you just try something different for once? Why don't you just open your mind a little bit and maybe think that there's possibly something, you know, like just give it a go. You've got nothing else to lose. Like, and that was kind of where I was at. It's like, well, if I'm going to kill myself anyways, I might as well try. And I did, and I was at such a bottom that I started listening, and it was just like immediate. It just happened so quickly. Like the moment that I let that willingness into my heart. And like I remember coming to one meeting one day, and I was just like, fuck you, fuck AA, fuck this program, I fucking hate all of you motherfuckers. Well, okay, you're kind of nice, but fuck you. And then like 2 days later, I was just like, I'm so grateful for this program. Like it was just like, and it was that fast. It was, yeah. And, you know, I've gone through some struggles since in the last couple of days, but I've noticed it's because I've started taking my will back. And every time I just give it over to God and just let go entirely, I'm just in a wash of peace and serenity. So, yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I guess one last thing, the moment I figured it out was after that meeting where I was saying fuck everything, and Dawn reached out to me, and we talked the day before, or the like right before the next meeting, and we just like, she just prayed for me, and we meditated together, and like, I don't know what happened in that meditation, or in that prayer, but like I could feel God. It was insane. It was like, I could just feel my entire body just like expanding. And we were just quiet on the phone, and Dawn like said, she's like, Caitlin, like, do you feel that? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, cause I can feel that through this phone call. And it was, I can't even describe it, but it was beautiful. So yeah, thanks for asking me to share that, Bill.
Yeah. And, you know, that's what the book is saying. Basically her exact experience. It's the same experience as Fred and More About Alcoholism. They outline the spiritual program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty fucking drastic. It meant I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out the window. That was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through with the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important as that, he says, the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all of my problems. Then he writes, I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying, and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. Like, if that's not something to want, fuck, I don't know what is. So again, we'll go back to page 14. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals. So anybody new that's here that's like, fuck, I don't know if I want to do all this stuff. Like, the gifts come through the pain. The gifts come through the work. And it's not all pain. So like, let's not say everything's painful, because it's not all pain. If it was all pain, we wouldn't probably be here, because there's a lot of gifts that come with this stuff. And I think the gifts help us keep us motivated. Okay, anyway, let's keep going. The moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory, followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but his impact on me was sudden and profound. So what he's talking about there is God comes to most men gradually. We get the psychic change, you know, over time. With Bill W., he had the profound spiritual experience. He stepped from bridge to shore in one instant. Most of us step from bridge to shore through the circumstances that are presented over the time that we stay here. Okay? But we got to stay here. And we got to kind of get the time in and keep walking through these circumstances that seem heavy. And some aren't heavy. Some just let you go right through them. But through that, you know, we change and we get to heal. This is healing, man. For a moment, I was alarmed and called my friend, the doctor. So he's calling Dr. Silkworth here to ask if I was still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head saying, Bill, something has fucking happened to you that I don't understand, but you had better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way that you were. The good doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences. He knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there were thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what has so freely been given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. So this is the conception of Alcoholics Anonymous right here. Bill's laying in the hospital bed and he's like, I wonder if there's other people that I can give this away to. They in turn might work with some others. Hence the beginning of Bill's journey to really push this thing into the world. And like, if you guys know the history, and I touched base on it there last week, but the amount of work Bill W. had to do to get this program pushed into our lives, like it was relentless. It was a relentless pursuit so he could help people. Like writing the book and then trying to market the book and all the roadblocks. I have the original manuscript back here that has the whole story in it and all of the things this man had to do to get this book out. Fuck, it was God. It had to have been, but it was Bill lining his will with God. And I told you guys about the 3 miscarriages and the, you know, adoption that didn't go through and all of these other things we talked about last week. Like, this book in front of us is a miracle, and the miracles are like on the screen and sitting in front of you here too. And like, fuck, I can't even put in the words what Bill W. did. But he talks about step 12 right there. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all of my affairs. And like, underline that, the absolute necessity of trying to practice this shit in all of your life. Particularly, it was imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Like, I don't think imperative means optional. And like, for the real gifts of this program, fucking sponsorship is where it's at. Like, your heart just opens. Compassion is built. Through the building of compassion, fear falls away. Life takes on a new meaning. Everyone wants to find the purpose in their life. Well, when everything you do has meaning, the purpose of your life will unfold in front of you. And the ideal of what we think the purpose should be might be different than what God wants it to be. But if I'm going to do what God wants me to do anyway, and I fucking take that line in the previous pages, I don't pray for myself except how my requests bore on my usefulness to others, then I can expect to receive in great fucking measure. So we don't know what it looks like. But if I can be full and complete and get everything I need in life and feel so fucking good, I think that's what I would settle for. If you could give me all of that stuff and I have a modest life versus having a shitty life with all the nicest material goods, I think I'm going to take the modest life where I'm full and complete and I feel fucking good about who I am and what I do in the world, versus being miserable and having all the material blessings. But if you give an alcoholic that option, usually they're going to really have to think about it. I'm going to go home and I'm going to pray on that. To feel the best I've ever felt and to have everything I ever wanted to feel in me, or to have all this material shit and feel shitty, I'm going to have to go home and meditate on that. Like, it's a no-brainer, but it is. Anyway. faith without works is dead, he said, and how appallingly true for the alcoholic. Here, this is important. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through the work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots in life ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again. If he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would indeed be dead. With us, it's just like that. So that kind of says it all. If I don't fucking perfect and enlarge this spiritual life, I won't meet the certain trials and low spots in life ahead. And he talks about through the self-sacrifice. And I've said it all through the study. We've said it all through the study. The self-sacrifice is not just devoting time to people. It's understanding selfishness and sacrificing it for the benefit of you and the benefit of me. Through the self-sacrifice, then the natural process is unselfish constructive action. I take the action of wanting to be helpful when I'm relieved of the bondage of self. It's just a natural process. So.
Yeah, and I think that it tells you how to have a spiritual life right there. Through work and spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice. Well, what's the work? The work is outlined in the entire book, right? It's a manner of living. It's continuing to change everything about your life, everything you react to, everything you think, everything you do. That's the work. That's why it's hard, because I've been doing things a certain way my entire life. To change that, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to have to go basically do the opposite of everything I used to do. And, you know, the ego, the alcoholic ego hates that. It just screams some days. Like, I just want to lay on the couch and do nothing and just go into self-pity and all that crap. The work is to get out of that. The work is to pick up the phone, to pray, to write it down, to understand where it's coming from. It's work. And the self-sacrifice, I mean, a huge part of that is just being honest with someone. Because we don't want anybody to see that we're not doing too good, right? Well, if I keep that little secret, it's going to haunt me until I get rid of it. So the more open I can be with the people I'm around with, you know, I mean, the inventory, the reaching out, the being honest, all of this stuff is the sacrifice. It's a sacrifice of self. Vulnerability. That's something that I did not want anything to do with. Nuh-uh. Because I was just this guy who had learned how to dissociate from absolutely any sort of pain my entire life, that I didn't want to sacrifice, you know, actually having to feel something with another human being. And I always want everybody to, you know, think that I'm just on top of the world all the time. It's total bullshit. I have to understand that part of myself and sacrifice that immediately. Because, you know, that shit just fucks me right up. And I can't even see it's happening. So, you know, that's why it's important that I have sponsorship and really people that actually understand me in my life, because they're gonna be the ones that can point it out. I like how Don said the other night, like, you can't see the label from the inside of the bottle, right? That's the case. So I need other people's help, and I desperately needs God's help. So that's another thing that I really had to learn, was that be vulnerable with my higher power. What am I actually fucking asking for help with so I can be useful to other people? What am I actually bringing to the table of God? Am I just like spitting off words, or actually dumping my heart out to God? Right?
Okay. So for us, it's just like that. What more do you say?
Right.
And so far, Bill has told us twice that working with alcoholics is very important. Let's keep going. My wife and I abandon ourselves to the enthusiasm, to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. I was fortunate, for my old business associates remained skeptical for 1.5 years, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time, and I was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to drink. But as soon as I found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. So nothing ensures immunity like working with another alcoholic, right out of step 12. And Bill's saying that that's part of his program. He needs to do that. He found that working with another alcoholic would solve the day, save the day. And then he goes on to say, many times I have gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. So that's another truth. Working with another alcoholic lifts you up and sets you back on your feet and gets you back grounded in humility. And I know through the middle phase of my working with others, there was a lot of times where I wasn't feeling the best, and I started learning what it says here, and I would just go work with others. And maybe to some degree I was seeking relief out of it, but the benefits that came down the road have gotten me sober for the 6 years I've been sober, to the point where I love working with other alcoholics. Do I love it all the time? No. Sometimes it interferes with the shit I want to do, but it's a commitment. You know, never avoid these responsibilities if you assume them. Helping others is the foundation stone of our recovery. And sometimes I still do it out of relief. I don't know if I ever will not do it out of some relief sometimes, because I'm human and I get overcome by waves of self-pity and depression myself. But like Tommy was saying, sometimes we got to write shit down and look at it and find out where it comes from. So some of the waves of self-pity and depression, I got to fucking do the inventory and let's look and see where it comes from. But I still help another alcoholic, because what better way to look at myself than look at myself, talk to myself, and listen to myself across the table from me. Opening my heart, they're opening their heart, and I get set up and lift back on my feet. And I can make it another day. And when things go real good, I make it fucking months and months sometimes, just cruising. But like everything else, there's a time for dark and there's a time for light. And, you know, even normal people out there go through a lot of the shitter. It's not just us. Anyway, so we commenced to make many fast friends, and fellowship has grown up amongst us, of which is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere. I've seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I've seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one Western city and its environs, there are thousands of us and our families. We meet frequently so that newcomers may find the fellowship they seek. And I want to stop there for a second and just reiterate why we have the meetings. We meet there so that newcomers can find these meetings, so that they can get the spiritual experience. So we have our meeting on this channel, and we've been getting lots of newcomers, and it's the key. Like if everyone on the meeting, you get 20 people there, all 12 step doing the same thing, it'd be pretty fucking miserable meeting with everyone fucking talking about the same thing. But when there's a reason there, somebody who's struggling or somebody who hasn't been through that part yet, or, you know, it makes it all worth it. And I really love like reaching out and trying to find people to bring on the meeting. I want people to have what we got. I really want to give it away. And I think our meeting does a really good job at bringing the directions in the book and carrying the message. So you know, if anyone is regulars on our meeting, you know, and you go to other meetings, fucking bring them on, bring them over, you know, and like we heard last night, maybe it's too heavy and it's too drastic for some people, but for the people that want it, and if they're listening, it's right there for them. But, you know, not everyone wants recovery. Not everyone wants to fucking do the work. But I think our channel's really highlighted recovery and doing the work. And the results are fucking apparent. They're apparent, period.
And if you think about it too, like Bill was just throwing himself at alcoholics because there was no meetings at that time. He had no choice. He was just trying to figure out how to stay sober, and he had that desperation of his rock bottom. So he knew that, you know, working with another alcoholic worked, and that was his only way out of depression, because he didn't have meetings to go to. He didn't have a sponsor to call. He didn't have, like, maybe he had people to talk to, but he didn't really have the program the way it was laid out. We have it today. We have hundreds of meetings a week. So if you're ever thinking like you're having a terrible day, just remember how Bill was going through this, basically alone with his higher power, with depression, all of these things. Like, he literally had to go find fucking alcoholics, go to the hospitals, ask around, go to the bars, pull people out of the bars. Like, we got nothing to complain about. I remember I used to chair the Alpha House meeting too, and there'd be some days where I'm just like, oh fuck, like I don't want to go, blah blah blah. I'm in my new truck and I go to the Alpha House and I'm all like fucking self-pity, and I go in and I'm like walking through the mats, people are puking on the floor. I'm like, dude, like, give me a fucking break. Come on, man. Because I was the guy one time sleeping on the mat. Like, what the fuck do I have to complain about? Nothing. But doesn't mean I won't complain. Doesn't mean I won't go into self-pity. It just happens because my ego, it's never enough for my ego. Like, never enough. And so, I mean, that's why I need a spiritual way of life, a spiritual way of living, because when I get into the mode of, you know, I forget where I came from and I think that life's not treating me well, you know, I need people in the program to set me straight. And, you know, and like, I love the change that can happen from listening to a newcomer, you know, someone who's like still shaking in his chair, crying, doesn't know what to do with his life. And you're going, oh yeah, fuck, that's what it's like. Life's pretty good. You know, even though we go through hard times, and I'm not discounting any of that. You know, the human mind is a very fucking complicated thing. You add alcoholism to that, it's like triple complicated. And here we are, but we have this very simple program that is the answer to all of that. It's the answer to all that. And, you know, even though it seems like sometimes it just seems like this stuff's not working, but it is working. It's just not the way I think it should.
Okay. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with him are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seemingly worldliness and levity. But just underneath, there is a deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. Most of us feel we need look no further for utopia. We have it with us right here and now. Each day, my friend, simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself into a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to all men. Boom. That's it.
And I just want to point out that line is so powerful, that faith has to work with us 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. Just keep that in mind when you're, you know, thinking you're having a bad day, but like, it doesn't matter. We just keep bringing it. We keep bringing this simple program, into our life, even when it feels like it's not working. Even when it feels like that's the most important part. The time where it feels like you're just so disconnected is actually pushing you towards God. And I've noticed that in my recovery, where the hard times is just to push me towards God harder. And I just learned over time that the more I just keep doing this, you know, the less the hard times come. You know, I shouldn't say the less the hard times come, but it doesn't feel as tragic. Because like you get that first grace of God period and you're just like, yeah, sobriety is amazing. And then the next week you're like, what the fuck? I feel terrible. But that's just pushing me towards God. That's pushing me towards the program. And once I learn to not let up, then things get moving, right? And you know, the things that happen just, they don't have the effect that the intensity that they once had.
So that brings us to the end of our longest big book study in the world. Thank you for tuning in to the UDRcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at BILLWARDLIFE to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.